Welcome to Media Makers Spotlight from women in film and video in Washington, D.C. We bring you conversations with industry professionals for behind the screens, insight, and inspiration.
Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Candice Bloch, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by William Fay, a successful producer and motion picture executive for over 30 years. William is co-founder and president of production of Legendary Entertainment, where he was executive producer on a number of films, including box office hits Superman Returns, the Spartan epic 300, Ben Affleck's The Town, and the smash comedy The Hangover. Legendary also joined with Warner Brothers to co-produce and co-finance The Dark Knight trilogy and Inception, which were nominated for 8 Academy Awards each, winning 6 between them. Prior to Legendary, Mr. Fay was executive producer on many successful films, including The Patriot and the blockbuster Independence Day. William is currently CEO of a technology company focused on the wine and spirits business, while also producing a stage musical based on the movie Happy Texas. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thank you, Candice. Great to be here.
So just to jump right into it, because producing can cover so many aspects, some people might not actually fully understand what exactly a producer does. So how would you describe the role and responsibilities of a producer, like more broadly, in just a few sentences?
Nobody's ever asked me that question before. I'm kidding.
Right.
So the way that I would describe it is producer has 3 major jobs, right? The first is the financial part of it. Right, putting together the money. So you are raising the money to finance the movie. Or you're making a deal with the studio to finance the picture. You're finding the money to make it. Mm-hmm. The second job is a creative job, and that's working closely. That you possibly hiring the director, hiring the actors, making decisions with the director about who you're casting, working with the screenwriters. Often you're working with the screenwriters before there's even a director aboard. So working with the screenwriters, the directors, everything else to be part of that key creative team to make the movie. And the third job is what's kind of called line producing, which is being on the set with the director every day, making everything happen, supervising post-production, making sure that the film gets executed in the way, in the vision, that the collective vision that everybody has. All 3 jobs can be done by one person, can be done by 3 people, it can be 8 people. You know, it's depending on how big the movie is and what other things are going on. But those are sort of the essential producing functions.
Excellent. So just to dive in a little bit more on that, since there are those multiple credits and multiple roles, is there, and obviously some, depending on the scope and how many people there are and everything, you can kind of overlap some of them. But generally speaking, is there a breakdown between those credits of who's more responsible for what, in terms of how you would break down like a line producer versus an associate producer versus an executive producer?
Sometimes a line producer will get a specific credit that says line producer, but typically between executive producers and producers, it's kind of split up. Those 3 categories are split up, and it can be different depending on the film, depending on the relative experience of the people that are doing the jobs. And it really just depends.
Yeah.
So, typically there's the producer. If it's a key creative producer, they'll typically be a producer on the picture, but not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
And because I've heard that like executive producers are typically more with like getting and finding the money. But I know it's kind of be spread around all of them.
Yeah. No, I would say that would tend to be the thing. But the people that find the money can also get producer credit. Yeah. And the line producer can get producer credit. Mm-hmm. So it just depends on the dynamics of the movie.
Gotcha. So no easy answer, which is, the way a lot of it works. Yeah. But you've done a few of those roles, but mostly executive producing. To get into your story, what first drew you to filmmaking in general and then producing more specifically? So like, how did you break into the industry?
Well, I didn't grow up wanting to get in the movie business at all. I grew up outside of Seattle, Washington, went to Stanford, planning on going to law school or business school. While I was there, took a couple of film courses, kind of got hooked, wrote a couple of screenplays, ended up submitting them to UCLA Film School, got into UCLA Film School. So I ended up, rather than going to business school or law school, I ended up going to UCLA Film School, grad school, and had a great time and just got out from there, started at the absolute bottom of the business, being a PA and everything while writing scripts. I had a writing partner, so we worked together. Sold a couple of scripts, pretty early on realized that I didn't want to be a screenwriter because I wanted more agency over whatever it was that was getting made. So moved into producing. I produced a couple of pictures, but also was a line producer on a number of pictures. And so, had a good background and I also did every other job in the business. I mean, I worked as a grip. I worked as editor, assistant editor, assistant cameraman. So, had a pretty good grounding in the physical production of a film, and then kind of branched into other stuff. I spent most of 5 years in Africa making movies.
Oh, wow.
That was sort of my first producing gigs. On a decent sized movie were Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And then was getting one film after another there, and then realized if I could be Hollywood's man in Africa, or I could come back to Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
So I came back, got a job producing a film with Chris Rock. And from there, kind of got in the studio business. Did you want me to tell them, go through everything right now?
No, that's okay. I mean, okay. That's a good foundation. I mean, it sounds like, that's sort of speaking to the importance of just general education, and in college when it's kind of like you'll find what you want to do, hopefully. That's great. And it's nice to know you can always pivot and change. And yeah, so that's a really great launching point. Can you talk a little bit about Centropolis, some of your early things, and do you have any particular milestones that made you feel like this is for sure where you're going to stay? You're solidly grounded as a producer, and you'll make it in this business.
I made it.
Yeah, exactly.
One milestone was definitely doing the Chris Rock movie. It's called CB4. I love it. It's a crazy little comedy. We had a great time on it, and it was my first studio picture. So that was a big opportunity for me. And then I did a couple other studio movies, but certainly the beginning of my career at Centropolis was a huge thing for me. I had known Roland and Dean Devlin, who writes and produces with Roland, for quite some time. We talked about working together.
And that's the director, Roland.
No, Roland Emmerich, sorry,
yeah.
The director. Yeah, the director of all those movies. We got together early on and started talking about doing a film together. And so I went out to dinner with Roland and Dean, and they said, we want you to come in and join the company and let us pitch you our first movie that we're going to go off to write. And they pitched me Independence Day.
Wow.
So
it's quite a start. Yeah.
Yeah. I got pretty excited. And that truly, there's no question, Independence Day was the film that really made my career. I mean, it was just one of my favorite film experiences. We were all young. It was our first really big kind of movie. Roland Dean had done Stargate, but this was the first really big movie. It was one of those magical projects where everything seemed to go right. The actors turned out to be perfect for the roles. The effects that we did, a lot of those things, we didn't know how we were going to do them when we started the movie. Roland had the image in his mind. And so we had to figure out technologically how we were going to create those things. Like you think about the fire rolling down the streets and all that kind of stuff, which is simple to do today, right?
Right.
But then there was no clue on how to do it. But all those decisions seemed to go right. And then really just exploded. We did the first commercial that was ever put on to the Super Bowl for a movie.
Oh, wow.
And I've always found audiences seem to be able to tell if they're going to like something or it's a stinker.
Yeah.
Right. And you think you put all this money into advertising, and, if they smell that it's not good, then they're not going to show up.
Right.
And this one, people just went nuts for us. It was just an incredible experience. The 6 months between that Super Bowl commercial and the film getting released are just nuts, because we were still working, 24/7. We finished the movie 5 minutes before the studio needed to send out, all the thousands of prints. But it was just an amazing experience. And we were just like a family. I loved making that movie. I loved being president of Centropolis. It was just incredible experience. And then we did a few more movies after that.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't believe that was the first Super Bowl ad for a movie.
Yeah, it seems kind of obvious now, doesn't it?
Well, it sounds like a lot of things were being pioneered, and they're, you just build off of that, and a lot of that technology, as you said, it's easier now, and you just all those constraints just breed creativity. It's wonderful. So after Centropolis, you are one of the co-founders of Legendary Entertainment. Can you get into a little bit of how that kind of came to be?
when we did Independence Day and Godzilla, we had formed a digital effects company called Centropolis Effects, and I was the CEO of that company.
Mm-hmm.
And the cousin of one of the people that worked for us was Thomas Tull. He was in private equity, and he came out and came to the set, and we talked, and we just got to be friends, and we both play guitar, so we started jamming and everything. And he was just fascinated by the movie business, and I just recognized that he was a cool and very smart guy. And so we kind of stayed in touch. And then he came to me at one point, early like 2001 or something like that, and we started talking about maybe we should put together a film company,
mm-hmm.
actually a production company, and do our own financing. So we started working on that. We put together this whole plan to buy Orion Pictures, which is, Silence of the Lambs, Dances with Wolves, Throw Mama from the Train, one of my favorite movies.
I remember seeing Orion on so many starts of films I've seen over the years. Yeah.
Right. So we put together a whole package. MGM owned the rights, and we were going to buy those rights. And literally we were driving to sign the contracts when they said, well, we sold our entire library to Sony.
Oh, wow.
So we kind of went, now what do we do? Let's start looking for another library. And eventually Thomas just said, let's just raise the money
mm-hmm.
ourselves. Let's just start a movie company. And it was incredible on his part that he was able to pull all those investors together. And
mm-hmm.
it was kind of the first real private equity financed production company. And so we just did incredibly deep research on all the genres, what was working. We had all the historical data that we could work with from all the studios, because we working with this company in LA that does that. And so we did a huge, deep analysis, like I think the deepest anybody's ever done prior to starting a company. And so we were able to go to these private equity investors and say, if we concentrate on these genres and we concentrate on good directors, mm-hmm. and we don't, and we're not going to be cast driven, we're going to make these movies that we can make a certain return. Mm-hmm. And they bought into that. And then we put it together, and actually it worked out better than any of our wildest projections it turned out. So,
yeah, it sounds like it was a good gamble. But yeah, so that's a lot of, as people are understanding and listening, that's a lot of the business side of it. In producing, how have you found that you kind of maintain that broader vision, like creative vision of a project, while balancing that sort of operational side of things? Like, how do you do the creative and the logistical? Do you have like a thing that you like to keep in mind to guide you to balance those?
The first thing is I don't come from the business. I grew up in middle America. I try to keep a perspective of always looking at what I think the audience wants to see,
mm-hmm.
right? And thinking about creating entertainment that people are really going to enjoy. And coming from that perspective, as opposed to getting into too much of the insular Hollywood, where it's possible to kind of lose the perspective
mm-hmm.
of your audience. And so, and you can tell by the movies I've been involved in, they tend to be movies that do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just kind of keeping that, I think keeping that perspective always in mind. The amazing thing about it is every film is so totally different. You go from making a movie like Independence Day, where you're doing all this research and crazy stuff about what you can pull off technologically, and then we're making the Patriot, and now I'm learning more about the American Revolution that I never ever thought I would learn in my entire life. And so that's, just keeping that part of it fresh, I think, is a big part of it too.
Yeah, I guess the sort of project-based nature of it, it's like, you don't have any time to get sort of complacent or stuck in any routines or anything, because you're always
doing
for sure. All new challenges. Yeah.
From a business perspective, you're creating a startup with
mm-hmm.
every movie. And you're always working with different people, because, for example, a cinematographer can make 3 pictures a year easily.
Mm-hmm.
And an editor is going to make 1 picture every 2 years if you're talking about big movies. So you don't get to just put your team together and go, okay, let's just make a bunch of movies together,
mm-hmm.
right? You have to find different people every time. And each project is a totally different, you're going to be shooting in a different country, or you're going to be
mm-hmm.
inventing something new, a different way of shooting something. It's a challenging business.
Yeah, but it sounds fascinating and just like endlessly interesting. And it's great that you keep in mind that, you're an audience member too. So, to kind of keep that perspective of it, I think is great because clearly you've had success.
Yeah, and certainly what drives me nuts is when you see a movie. I mean, to me, I'm always keyed into, did we lose them, right?
Yeah.
Are we doing something where they're not going to be able to follow it? Like if I think about big battle scenes that we shoot, I want the audience to know, oh, here's how that piece of it's coming together logistically. So they know, oh, the good guys are starting to win. Oh, now the bad guys are starting to win. And it's like the geography of it and all that kind of stuff. I kind of get down into that. I mean, I feel like that kind of minutia is important. Or just even story points, like somebody at the end of the movie goes, I had no idea what that guy was supposed to be doing. Well, we need to fix that.
Yeah. No, I mean, then that's why you're still in this business for as long as you are and everything. So you had said that, when Legendary is kind of beginning, you were mentioning specific types of genres and everything. Do you have a personal favorite genre or types of movies that you're more drawn to? And like, do you know why?
In terms of the movies I like, no. I mean, I love great artistic movies. Obviously, I love effects movies. I love those. I love science fiction, I should say, not just effects movies generally. So I'm drawn to science fiction. I'm drawn to historical epics, like sports movies, comedies. I mean, a great comedy. I'm very picky about my comedies, though. They got to be good.
Well, sense of humor is very nuanced. So
yeah, it is. So those are the kind of movies that I love making. And again, no matter what you do, there's a certain sort of, obviously, the pictures that I made tend to be big movies, right? With lots of special effects and those kind of movies. That's just how it ended up. So it was interesting when we started doing that analysis for Legendary, what we discovered, and this is early on in this sort of trend. I mean, now it's a lot more obvious, but we really identified that we wanted to be in the franchise business, making things that, we could make sequels to. We wanted to be in the genre business, broadly speaking, meaning sci-fi, thrillers, action movies, horror, comedies, where again, if they were good enough, they were, real comedies.
If you deemed them funny enough, yeah.
Yeah. And we also learned that star-driven movies didn't particularly make that much of a difference, right? I mean, obviously they're important if you're making dramas, but analyzing it, we found that dramas really didn't fit that category that we were looking for. No dramas. We didn't really make family movies. We didn't make those kind of pictures. Star-driven movies for the most part. Although obviously we had a lot of big stars in some of these movies, but they were concept-driven movies, not star-driven, and focused on directors. That's the other thing that we found is great directors will tend to make great movies. So that's why we got in business with Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder and Todd Phillips. We're really focused on that kind of a director-driven company.
Gotcha. So you mentioned earlier as well, a lot of things like even with the Patriot, all the research and all of a sudden and like learning new techniques for getting some of the technical stuff and Independence Day. What do you think is like for you personally, some of the most fun? Like what's your most fun aspect of producing?
Certainly that part of it, the research, reading up on the subject. I mean, if it's something that's almost every film, there's a lot to learn, right? Whether it's a historical piece or not. And so doing all that research, all the outreach, I love being on the set. I really love that part of it. The actual, shooting, movie making part of it. And I love post-production. I love being able to just find the core and the key of what's going to make the movie work.
How often do you like to try to be on set?
It depends on the project. At Legendary, I would spend less time on the set just because we had so much going on. We'd have 4 pictures shooting at the same time. So if it was a picture that I was more involved with as an executive producer, then I'd be spending more time on that movie. But, and then we'd have other stuff going on where I'd just maybe show up on the set for a couple of weeks. But so I did kind of miss that part of it when we were doing that. Love talking and working with directors and helping them realize their vision. That's really the most exciting part of the job, because I think for people outside the business, I think everybody has a basic grasp of it, but a director has so much to do with what comes out of it. Just in terms of two directors can take the same script and make a totally different movie because they're working from their imagination. They're working from their learned experience, right? And lived experience. And that's just incredible to me. So a big part of it is always trying to find out or really help them find that, find that vision, so to speak.
Do you have a particular director that's like on your wish list to one day work with?
Oh boy. First of all, the directors, I've been really lucky. I've worked with some great
you've
directors.
Worked with so many.
Yeah, and people that are just great people. Steven Spielberg would be amazing to work with. That's it's funny. I can't think of anybody offhand other than that. Of course, that would be an amazing experience. And I can think of lots of dead directors that I would love to work with.
Are there a few you could share some of those? I mean, we're a media-minded listenership here. So,
well, Stanley Kubrick, I think, would have been amazing to work with. Although I think as a producer, he probably would make you pull your hair out.
Right. But in terms of the genres you like, that works. Yeah.
For sure. Or David Lean, Billy Wilder. I'm a huge fan of Billy Wilder movies. So if you want comedy, he's the guy.
Well, hopefully you still have a Steven Spielberg movie in your future.
There we go. I'll give him a call.
Yeah. And you're the type of person that could. Wow. It's So because of you've got this lengthy career, have you noticed any particular differences or evolution in the role of a producer over the decades? Like, I'd imagine at the very beginning, you wouldn't have a bunch of VFX producers, and now you probably do. Maybe there's more women, things like that. Like, what changes have you seen over those 30 plus years?
Well, certainly there's more diversity in the cast and crew, for sure. And there's an effort made to do that, which I think is amazing. And it's funny, just a little side note. Universal introduced me to Chris Rock for CB4, my first movie. And the goal really was to put together a completely diverse crew, and this is the early 90s. Nobody was doing that. But we absolutely had the stated goal of putting together this incredibly diverse crew. And I think one of the reasons that Universal introduced me to Chris Rock is because I'd made a lot of movies in Africa with primarily an African crew. And they somehow thought, well, that made me the diversity guy. But it was great. I mean, so the first couple of movies I made were actually geared around diverse crews. Then I worked with Alan Rudolph, and it was the same thing. We really were working to put together a very, very diverse crew. And so that made it a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it works to your benefit. I mean, we've done a lot of discussions on this show even about, all of the added benefits of widening the scope of who you include in storytelling, so.
Yeah, and the exciting thing was a couple of, but 4 years later, I was doing Independence Day, and a couple of people that I worked with on CB4 got to work on Independence Day. So they got a huge career boost out of that. So
that's cool.
I'm very proud of that too.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of who you know in the industry and proving yourself on one project to move to the next. And, know. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely that. There's obviously effects. It's a totally different business. You're right. I mean, now those people are key. When I was first starting out, it was rare that they would ever even get a credit on the, along with costume designer and editor and those sorts of things. They were way back in the credits someplace. So now that's really come to the forefront. And that's an incredible development that I think really hit home for me finally about the time of Avatar. Just the fact that there is no image that you can imagine that you can't create on film. That's a shocking development because so many things I would read, including at one point early on Game of Thrones, right? Where we were just like, how could we ever make this? It seems like it's impossible. You'd read stuff or sci-fi stuff that seemed impossible. Now you can create that. There's no image you can't create. And that just opens up this entirely new world. In fact, looking back through old sci-fi novels that were impossible to make just to see if there's something that you can put together. So that's a huge, huge development.
That is cool. Yeah. I mean, imagination is limitless, but as you said, it's whoever brings that particular vision is to life. That's one version of it. When you're reading a book, like you said, you have your own visual play or story going on in your mind, which could look way different from somebody else's. So it's always interesting to see how it comes together and how many people kind of agree on the way it turned out, So
Yeah,
because
for sure.
sometimes people are like, that's not how I was picturing that, but yeah.
No, and obviously we did a lot of those kind of movies too, where you've got this huge, like not crazy, rabid. That's not the same thing, right? I mean, rabid, like very committed fan base. And you got that push and pull between, and I talked about earlier, like I want the audience to know where the movie's going. So how do you create something that satisfies that fan base, but then can appeal to audiences that aren't part of that fan base? And that's a real challenge. That's the thing that movies like the Dark Knight trilogy or Iron Man or things like that, they managed to crack that, where you satisfy the fanboys, fangirls, but you're still telling a story that's accessible. And it's tough. It's really tough sometimes, because you'll do something and, the hardcore fans will be like, well, he didn't wear that kind of button on his cape. And you're like, what? Boy, that's
at a
rough.
certain point, you're like, we had to get it made, like you can't do everything and you can't please everyone.
Yeah, it's really interesting like that. The other major change from a business perspective for producers is the advent of the streamers and everything. On the one hand, it's amazing because there's so much more content being made, a huge amount of content. The problem is that, for most of my career, if you're a producer, you put together projects and you'd make some worked, some didn't. I mean, the standard line is, you make 10 movies, 6 of them fail, 3 do okay, and 1 pays for everything, right? Because you made the hit, assuming that you make enough, right?
Yeah.
And so the difference now is that producers, certainly from when they're working with streamers and everything, you tend to have less of an equity position in the film. Right? You tend to be a hired hand. That's a real change. And sometimes even you don't really get the metrics for how your film did. There used to be a very simple measurement, right? Here's the box office. Here's back in the DVD day. Here's how many DVDs we sold. Great. We made a hit movie. Now it's like, well, the audience seemed to like it, but they won't tell us like how many people watched it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the kind of debates going around about how they're kind of hiding some data or not disclosing as much, and how the streaming services really have kind of shaken everything up, and for better or worse. But yeah, it's tricky because in terms of things like royalties and all that as well, it becomes difficult for different performers and things, and it's an interesting evolving process.
Yeah, it truly is. I mean, from a content point of view, I think it's an amazing time. I mean, we are absolutely
right.
I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but we're in the golden age of television. You can find a series that's a perfect shot for exactly your demographic,
right?
And that's amazing. I mean, as opposed to like they're 3 networks and a couple of places.
Right. It's almost too much choice at a certain point. I mean, if there is such a thing. Yeah. But yeah. You mentioned, television as well. Most of what you've produced has been films, correct?
Yeah, I did a couple of TV things. I did a TV series, did a TV movie, but almost all film.
Is that do you just prefer film? Would you consider doing more television or series, episodic type
I would,
stuff?
but for a lot of my career, film was where it was at creatively. I shouldn't say that. I never really, I don't think I had the credits and everything to do a lot of TV.
Right.
And also I found film, certainly up until recently, film was where you had the chance to really play with all the toys. And
it sounds like it serves
cool
the genres
stuff
that you like better. Where you had those budgets to be able to do it. And now it's like it took a while for some of those streamers services to get big enough to have the budgets to execute those visions of things like sci-fi.
Yeah, I mean, nobody was doing Game of Thrones 20 years ago. You might do a big miniseries or something, but yeah, creating something like that would go on for years didn't exist.
Well, it does now, which is exciting.
Sure does.
So just kind of in general, if someone wants to become a producer, what sort of skill sets or background do you think helps support that role? And what kind of advice might you give to somebody that wants to pursue producing?
I think having some business sense is a huge help. Whatever of those 3 categories I was talking about, I think having some business sense is an important part of it. In terms of kind of breaking into the business, you want to hopefully get a job working as a producer's assistant or working in a writer's room or being an assistant to an agent, something like that, something where you get exposed to the business. I mean, a key part of it is networking, at least as much, I would think, more than any other business I can think of, because it's so project oriented, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you find 2 or 3 people that you like to work with and that's that. You got to know as many people as possible. So I think the networking part of it, I mean, when I'm like on the Stanford sort of mentorship program or advice program. So a lot of students from there will call me up and I just tell them, get down here, meet people, even just other people like you that don't have jobs, because somebody's going to get one.
Right.
And being in those positions, as I said, if it's an agent's assistant or something like that, where you're out meeting people is a key part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then for me, I mean, obviously working on a set, doing a couple of the basic jobs on a set was great education too, because you get to see how everything works. I mean, I always admired that about Ben Affleck, who, you know, worked as an actor, but when he was on the set, he was really paying attention and learning. And when we did The Town together, I mean, he'd already done a couple of movies, but you know, he knew his stuff.
Yeah.
He really knew his stuff.
It's a great foundation because one of the things that we like about this show that we're doing here is kind of educating on different aspects of production, because the more you know about, the more that goes into it. I feel like it makes you kind of better at whatever specific role you're doing as well, because having a better understanding about, you know, lighting or set design helps you as a cinematographer, director, you know, like they all tie together. So
yeah,
I think it's wonderful to hear. I mean, it sounds like part of your success comes from that, you know, foundation.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one little anecdote. One of my first jobs getting out was working for a very famous low budget producer named Roger Corman, who made all sorts of B movies, like just cranked them out. And we were making a sci-fi movie. I was like, I'd just gotten out of UCLA, I think, UCLA grad school. I was working as a PA. You know, we were falling behind and everything was getting messed up. And they go, we have to put a second unit together so we can get these shots done. So they put together the second unit team and they go, okay, we need to find an assistant cameraman. I'm like, well, I do that job. I'd never done it before, but I'd gone to UCLA where I learned how to run a camera,
what it was. Yeah.
change film, pull focus, do all that stuff. So they actually said, okay, well, you'll be the second assistant cameraman on second unit. And so the second unit ended up shooting, like, I think a quarter of the movie at least. Not only all the effects stuff, but all sorts of stuff got pushed in. And they had taken the production designer to be the second unit director. And the production designer was Jim Cameron.
Oh, look at that.
So,
wow. That's really cool.
That was a pretty great education for me. It was watching him at work. And I think he hadn't even done, after that, he went and directed his first movie.
Yeah, I mean, I find that when you hear the backgrounds and stories of so many of these like successful higher up, like constantly producing creatives, that they have a kind of a breadth of knowledge as well as a depth, you know, like they touch on a lot of subjects. So just to make sure we don't go too long on time, I know in the intro I mentioned that you are currently not producing in Hollywood necessarily, but you're working in the wine and spirits sort of technology stuff. Can you explain a little bit more about what you're doing now, but then also how like your background in producing and sort of as an entertainment executive, it helps you do what you're doing in a completely different avenue now?
Yeah. So I was about to start a movie at the beginning of COVID. Obviously, COVID shut everything down. So this is like 4 years ago. And right at that time, a friend of mine, strangely enough, from UCLA Film School, who's like an inventor and engineer, brought me this thing he'd been working on. And it was they had developed this electromagnetic field process for wine and spirits. And when you run a wine or spirit through this electromagnetic field, you can actually manipulate it on a molecular level and make it taste better. So I was fascinated by the technology. I raised some money. So I put in some money and we developed a prototype, and then I raised some money. And by the time I got that far, I was so excited about it that I jumped in to run the company, because I get to work with these brilliant inventors and physicists and distillation chemists. And it was just a really great sort of 90-degree turn for me to do something totally different. And I'm having a great time with it, and the company's doing amazing. So I've been working on that. But in terms of obviously anything I learned from the business side of the film business has been helpful for this. I mean, and as I said, every film is a startup. So I'm used to kind of starting from scratch on something. And by the way, it does not hurt at all to say that the producer of the Hangover is now in the spirits business. So that comes in kind of handy too.
Yeah.
So yeah, just having a great time with it. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun just doing something different. And I'll go back and make some more movies. But for right now, this is just fantastic.
I mean, it's just so cool that in a lot of aspects, even actors, they get to learn a whole new thing for each project. And I think filmmaking in general and this storytelling, this whole like world and the industry is just such a great place for fostering education. I don't know. It's like you get to learn so many interesting and cool things. And it sounds like you've done so much research on this for your new business that maybe there's a movie somewhere to come out of it where you already know all that stuff. Yeah. But you did also say that you're producing something for theater as well, based on Happy Texas.
Right.
Can you explain a little bit more about what we can expect to see from that?
Yes, I'm very excited about it. Very excited about it. This was something, again, that came out of COVID. Some friends, one is a composer, has done a lot of musicals and operas and stuff, and a book writer. And they had gotten together and started working on this project, and they got a few months in before, and they kind of went, we don't have the rights to this. We better call Bill Fay and see if he can,
work his magic.
Get the rights.
Yeah,
buy the rights. They called me up and they named the film. It was Happy Texas, which one of my close friends had produced. So I knew all about it. So I jumped in to basically get them the rights. At the beginning, was just about finding the rights. So I talked with the director. I talked with Miramax. We kind of worked everything out. And at that point, the owner of the rights said, "Well, I'll give the rights if you will produce it." And I was like, "Yeah." I started getting really excited about it. I watched the movie a bunch of times, and it's like the perfect movie for a stage musical. And so we started developing it. And about 2 or 3 months ago, we went out to Broadway directors. And the first person that we really seriously talked to was Darko Treznak, who had won a Tony for Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder. And he also had produced on Broadway. And he'd also directed Anastasia, the Disney thing. So he was very experienced with musical theater and everything. And he fell in love with it and jumped into it, brought this amazing cast of Tony-nominated actors and people that were starring in, like the star of Water for Elephants on Broadway right now, joined this team.
Wow.
And so we put this together and we did a industry presentation of it the week before last in New York for potential investors and all the regional theaters and all the theaters like that. And it went incredibly well. And now we've got a lot of momentum going. And another thing that I've never done before, I'm fortunate, I've got a couple of friends that are Broadway producers. So I call them up every week or two and go, what do I do now?
Right.
But I'm just having a great time with that too. It's so much fun, and it's very different from the movie business.
Yeah, and the theater and the movie business they go back and forth with each other a bit already. I mean, there's a lot of plays that turn into films and films that turn into plays and all of that. So it's
and there are films that turn into plays that then turn into films.
Exactly, and they cycle through. I know. But it's exciting that you get to dive into this new lane, but also with like knowledge of everything that you bring with it, and those connections to lean on, for those questions you said, it's
well, I'm excited to be at the point in my career where I really can pick and choose the things that I really love to do. I think early in my career, my mindset was I can do anything, right? Doesn't matter how big of a pain in the butt that director is, I can handle it. Or how crazy that star is, I can handle it. Or how difficult the production is going to be shooting on top of the mountain. Like I can handle it. And now I'm like, no, I want to work with people that I like to work with on things that I think are going to be successful and we can have a great time making them too. So
yeah. Well, it's well earned and well deserved.
Well, thanks.
If anyone wants to learn about, the projects you've produced, is there a place they can go online to learn more?
Other than IMDb, I think would probably be the obvious thing.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a great place to start.
Yeah. Well, I recommend checking that out because it's there's quite a list there. It's exciting. And it might remind you of some things to rewatch because there's some great ones in there.
Yeah. Thank you for that little plug. Appreciate that. I'll make, 2 or 3 cents if you watch it again.
And it'll go towards these great projects. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today and sharing all of your insights and experience and everything. And it's been a really fascinating conversation. So thank you.
My pleasure, Candice. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Media Maker Spotlight from Women in Film and Video. To learn more about WIF, visit WIFF.com. F as in Frank, V as in Victor.org. This podcast is created by Sandra Abrams, Candice Bloch, Brandon Ferry, Tara Jabari, and Jerry Reinhardt, and edited by Michelle Kim and Inez Perez, with audio production and mix by Steve Lack Audio. Subscribe to continue learning from more amazing media makers. Please visit MediaMakersSpotlight.com for more information.